This really isn't a walk-in kind of night. Guests only, you'll have to wait outside. Put the little toy away. We've got people for the real work. Level holds in the dark.
He's not a guest. He's the man taking over at 9.
I filed a report on him. I know. I read it.
At midnight, a man in a faded work coat was walked to the front doors of the Aldridge Hotel in San Antonio. One security guard stayed a half step behind each of his shoulders. He was not loud. He was not resisting. In one hand, he held a folded incident report someone had pushed at him at the desk. In the other, closed loose against his palm, he held a small brass weight on a worn cord. The glass doors opened, onto a thin rain falling over the river walk. He stepped through them without a word. He did not look back at the marble, or the chandeliers, or the long oak desk, where a young clerk was already turning to the next guest. 9 hours later, the same people walking him out would be standing in a row, waiting for him. The night had started 6 hours before that, plain as a Tuesday. Quick question before we go on. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your town in the comments. And if stories about people getting their dignity back are your kind of thing, the subscribe button helps more than you'd guess. That's it. Back to the lobby. His name was Earl Whitfield, and he was 47 years old. He had spent 11 years in the Army, as a combat engineer, the kind of soldier who reads a structure the way other people read a face. He had come to the Aldridge at 6 that evening, while there was still gold light on the river and the bartenders were cutting limes. He had come quietly, on purpose. In 9 hours, at 9 the next morning, a group of veterans Earl had pulled together. Over 4 years would close on the hotel. They had bought it out of a slow bankruptcy. Earl was the operating partner, the one who would run the building once the papers were signed. He intended to walk the property one last time, before it was his to answer for. That was the engineer in him. You don't sign for a thing you haven't put your own hands on. So he walked it the way he walked. Everything. Slow. Methodical. Reading. He started in the old ballroom on the second floor, where the staff were already setting round tables for some morning conference. He ran his palm along the wall by the service door and felt the faint, cool damp that doesn't belong in dry plaster. He looked up. There was a patch in the ceiling near the far corner, a square of newer paint over older paint. The kind of repair that covers a thing rather than fixes it. On a clipboard by the door hung a maintenance log. One line read, "Ceiling leak, ballroom, completed." Earl looked at the patch, then at the word completed, and something in him went still and quiet, the way it used to before a long shift. He did not say anything. He noted it the way he noted everything. Slightly wrong paint, that almost nobody in that building had bothered to look at twice. Funny, the things we paint over and call finished. 4 floors up, in a small office behind the front desk, a man named Grant Mercer was looking at numbers. Mercer was the night manager, 44, and he ran the Aldridge's overnight hours like they were his alone. He had a good suit for midnight, and a careful part in his hair. The new owners took over in the morning, and Mercer had spent 2 weeks making sure the books they inherited looked clean and the building looked sharp. He wanted the men with the money to walk in at 9 and see a property that ran itself. He wanted them to see him. There was one number he had moved. A ceiling repair in the ballroom, properly bid, would have cost about $12,000 and closed the room for 3 days. The conference in the morning paid more than that. So Mercer had signed off on a patch and a fresh coat and marked the work order completed. He told himself the real repair could wait until after the handover, when it would be somebody else's line item. It was, he had decided, a reasonable call. Most bad calls are, from the inside. Down in the lobby, the brass weight in Earl's coat pocket had a name behind it. It was a plumb bob, a small pointed brass weight on a cord that builders drop to find true vertical, to see whether a wall stands straight or only looks like it does. This one had belonged to Sergeant First Class Ray Coleman, Earl's squad leader, who had carried it through 2 deployments and had a saying for it. A wall can lie to your eye, Coleman used to say. The line never does. Level holds in the dark. Coleman did not come home from Kandahar. Earl had carried the plumb bob for 9 years. Near the lounge, a woman was standing by the window, with a child and 3 bags, looking at her phone the way people look at a phone. That has just stopped being any help. Her name was Allie. The boy beside her was about 6, and he had given up on the grown-up problem and gone looking for a more interesting one. He found Earl. "What's that?" the boy asked, pointing at the cord hanging from Earl's pocket. Earl crouched down, so they were the same height. That was a habit too. "This," he said, "is a plumb bob." He let it hang from his fingers. The brass swung, slowed, and settled, the point hanging dead still toward the floor. "Watch. Doesn't matter how I hold my hand. This little weight always knows which way is down. Always." The boy watched it like it was a magic trick. "How?" "It just tells the truth," Earl said. "Even in the dark. Especially in the dark." "I'm Sam," the boy said. "Earl." Allie came over then, apologizing, the way tired people apologize for their kids being curious. Their connecting flight was. Earl listened the whole way, through without interrupting, which is rarer than people think. Then he stood and waved over a young porter who had been hovering near the bell cart. It was a thin kid named Danny, maybe 20, with a lanyard he kept touching like he wasn't sure he was allowed to wear it. "We've got room somewhere for these 2 tonight," Earl said. "Not a question." Danny looked toward the front desk, then back at Earl, and seemed to decide something. "There's the staff suite on too," he said. Quietly. "Nobody's in it." He took Allie's heaviest bag, before she could argue. Sam looked back, over his shoulder, as they walked toward the elevator. "Bye, Earl." "Tell the wait I said bye." "I will," Earl said, and meant it. Then he was alone in the middle of the lobby of a building. That would be his in 9 hours, where nobody knew his name, and that was exactly how he had wanted it. He had built a life out of being underestimated, and then quietly being right. He did not need a single person in that room to know who he was. He just wanted to see how the Aldridge treated a man it thought was nobody. He turned and walked to the front desk to ask for a room. The clerk at the desk was named Shane Dolan. He was in his late 20s, and he wore the Aldridge's gray uniform, with the kind of pressed precision that some young men mistake for competence. He was on the phone when Earl reached the counter, his voice warm and bright, and he held up one finger, without looking, the universal gesture for wait. Earl waited. "Yes, Mr. Reyes, absolutely. We have your block of 9 rooms ready, and the ballroom doors open at 7 sharp for setup." Shane's smile carried all the way down the line. "We're so glad to host the conference. Anything at all, you ask for me by name." He set the phone down, still smiling, and the smile cooled by a degree or 2 when he turned and saw who had been waiting. He looked at the coat first. Faded canvas, a little oil at one cuff. He looked at the empty hands, the lack of luggage, the cord hanging from the pocket. His eyes did a small, quiet sum, the way a face does math it would never say out loud. "Help you," Shane said. "I'd like a room for the night," Earl said. "1 person, whatever you've got." Shane's fingers rested on the edge of the keyboard, but did not move to it. "We're pretty tight tonight," he said. "Big group in for the morning." He glanced past Earl, toward the lounge, toward the doors. "Were you waiting on someone?" "No, because the lobby seating is for registered guests." Shane said it gently, almost kindly, the way people deliver a thing they want to sound like policy instead of a decision. "If you're not checking in, I'm going to have to ask you not to wait around in here." Earl looked at him for a moment. "I'm asking to check in." A small pause. Shane's eyes went to the screen, then back. "Let me see what I can do," he said in the tone of a man who has already decided what he can do. He did not touch the keys. The lobby doors opened behind them. A cluster of people came in laughing. The conference group, lanyards already out, rolling bags whispering across the marble. Shane's whole posture changed. His shoulders came up, his voice climbed back into its warm register, and he came around the desk. Almost before they reached it. "Welcome to the Aldridge. You must be Mr. Reyes's people. We've been expecting you." He was already gathering key packets, already pointing toward the elevators, already telling them where coffee would be at 6. 3 of them had no reservation in hand. Earl watched Shane wave that away with a laugh, watched him write rooms against names. Without a flicker of the tightness he'd shown a minute earlier. It took 4 minutes. Earl counted them, the way he counted. Everything, quietly, completely, without making a show of it. When the group had gone up, Shane drifted back behind the desk, still, riding the warmth of being useful to the right people. He seemed mildly surprised Earl was still there. Like I said, Shane told him, tight night. He reached for a stack of papers and squared their edges against the counter. There's a couple of places down toward the highway that'd be easier for you. I can write down the names. Earl did not raise his voice. He never did. I watched you put 3 walk-ins into rooms just now, he said. I'm asking for one. Something flickered across Shane's face. Not guilt, exactly, more the irritation of a man whose script has been interrupted. He opened his mouth, and that was when a door behind the desk opened, and a second man stepped through, straightening his cuffs, wearing a good suit for midnight. Is there a problem out here? Grant Mercer asked, in the smooth, even voice of someone who has already decided whose problem it is. He looked at Earl. He took in the coat, the hands, the cord at the pocket, and he came to his conclusion in about the same second. Shane had, except Mercer had the authority to act on his. He had the night ahead of him to fill, and a ballroom upstairs he very much needed no one to look at too closely. The brass weight sat quiet and dead level in Earl's pocket, pointing the only direction it ever pointed. No problem, Earl said. I'm trying to rent a room. Your clerk is telling me I can't wait in the lobby while he does it. Mercer set his hand flat on the counter. He had a way of standing that put himself and Shane on one side and the other person on the other, a small geometry of the body that told you the conversation was already decided. He did it now, without seeming to think about it. Mr. I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. Whitfield. Mr. Whitfield. Mercer let the name sit there a second, like he was filing it somewhere low. We've got a full house and a major event in the morning. My staff has to keep the lobby clear for arriving guests. That's not personal. That's just how we run a tight night. He smiled, and the smile was the most insulting thing in the room. Because it was so reasonable. There are other options closer to the highway. I'm happy to have Shane print you a list. You said. Full house. Earl's voice stayed level. He just checked in 3 people, without a reservation. I watched him do it. Those guests are part of a contracted block. 2 of them weren't on it. He wrote them in. For just a moment something passed behind Mercer's eyes. Not shame. Closer to the irritation of a man who has been watched more carefully than he expected. He had taken Earl for the kind of tired that doesn't pay attention. He was recalibrating. I'd like to speak to the manager on duty, Earl said. You're speaking to him. Then I'm asking you, manager to customer. Do you have a room, or not? Mercer's jaw moved. Behind him, at a small desk against the back wall, a woman in a cardigan had stopped typing. Her name tag read R. Ortiz. She was the night auditor, the one who balanced the day's books between 2 and 4. She had gone very still over her keyboard, her eyes on the screen, and her whole attention on the counter. 2 guests in the lounge had quieted too. The lobby had developed that particular tension that forms when people sense something unfair is happening and are each waiting for someone else to be the one to name it. Mercer felt the room shift, and like a certain kind of man, he answered it by tightening his grip. I've been more than patient, he said, his voice dropping the pretense of warmth. This is a private establishment. I've explained that we can't accommodate you, and I'm going to ask you, one time, to step outside and stop disrupting my lobby. I haven't raised my voice, Earl said. I haven't moved from this spot. There's no disruption here, but the one you're describing. That landed, and Mercer knew it landed, and that was the problem. He could not afford a slow argument in the middle of the floor on the last night before the handover, with the auditor watching and 2 guests turning in their chairs. He needed this gone. He glanced toward the corridor where, at this hour, a single overnight security officer usually sat by the loading entrance. Wait here, he said, which was a strange thing to say to a man he'd just ordered to leave. Then he stepped back through the door. Behind the desk, Earl waited. The plumb bob hung quiet against his hip. Behind the door was the small office where the numbers lived. Mercer stood over the desk for a moment and made himself brief. He was not a cruel man, exactly, and if you had told him that night that he would have been honestly offended. He was a frightened one, which from the outside often looks the same. He had come up the hard way at 3 different properties and been passed over twice for the day manager job by men with better degrees and worse instincts. He had watched the Aldridge slide into bankruptcy under an owner who never visited, and he had held the overnight together with duct tape and double shifts because somebody had to. Now strangers were buying it. In 9 hours they would walk in with their money and their lawyers, and Mercer needed them to look at the building and look at him and decide to keep him. He had 2 weeks of clean books and 1 good suit writing on it. He looked at the open work order on the screen. Ballroom ceiling, completed. He knew it wasn't completed. He knew exactly what it was, a patch, a coat of paint, and a problem postponed past the date it would be his to answer for. $12,000 and 3 lost room nights, or a clean handover. He had made his choice 2 weeks ago, and most nights he didn't think about it. Tonight, for some reason, he thought about it. It was the man in the coat. Something about the way he'd said, "I watched you do it." Flat, unhurried, certain. Not the voice of a man begging for a room. The voice of a man taking inventory. Mercer pushed the thought away. A tired nobody in a work jacket, a cord hanging out of his pocket like he'd wandered off a job site. There was nothing there. He told himself there was nothing there, and the telling took a little more effort than it should have. He opened a blank incident form on the screen and looked at it. Then he closed it again. He'd come back to it. Paper had a way of making a decision look like a procedure, and some part of him already wanted the cover of that. He squared his shoulders, fixed his cuffs, and went back out to make the problem leave. It did not leave easily, because Earl had no intention of leaving. "I'd like your full name and your title," Earl said when Mercer returned. "For my own records. Grant Mercer, night manager." He gave it crisply, the way you give a thing you're proud of, and only realized a half-second later that he'd handed it over to a man who'd asked for it the way you ask for evidence. "Thank you," Earl said, and did not explain why. Behind the desk, Renee Ortiz had started typing again, but slowly, and not, Earl thought, the kind of typing that balanced a ledger. He caught her glance once. She looked away fast. He understood the look. He'd seen it on a lot of good people standing inside bad structures. The look of someone who knows the line and knows they can't cross it from where they're standing. Mercer made a short call from the desk phone, 3 words. A heavy-set security officer came down the corridor a minute later, unhurried, the way men move when they've done a thing many times. Mercer didn't ask Earl to leave again. He simply nodded toward the doors and let the larger man's presence do the asking. "You don't want to do it like this?" Earl said. Not a threat. Almost gentle. A last off-ramp offered to a man who couldn't see he needed one. "I want my lobby clear," Mercer said. "And here's the thing I keep coming back to." Earl could have ended it right there. 3 sentences, the name of the buyer's attorney, a phone in his pocket, that would have brought the whole charade down on Mercer's head in 5 minutes. He had every right to. He chose not to. Not out of weakness. He wanted to see the whole shape of the thing before he touched it. Because if this was how the Aldridge treated a nobody at midnight, then he needed to know it all the way down before he owned it in the morning. So he didn't argue. He didn't reach for the phone. But he didn't go to the doors yet, either. "Give me a minute," Earl said, to no one in particular, "and I'll walk out on my own." He turned, not toward the exit, but toward the wide staircase that curved up to the 2nd floor, toward the ballroom, where the morning's tables were already set under bright chandeliers. The security officer started to follow. Mercer almost stopped him. Almost. But the man was finally moving away from the desk. Mercer wanted him gone more than he wanted to understand where he was going. And that, too, was a choice he would have time to regret. Earl climbed the stairs slowly, the way he climbed everything, reading. At the top, the ballroom door stood open. The room was beautiful in the way old rooms are, when someone has just cleaned them for company. Gold light, white cloths, ranks of round tables waiting for a conference that would fill them at 7. He stood in the doorway and let his eyes go up to the far corner, to the square of newer paint he'd noticed at 6 o'clock. And in the quiet of the empty room, under the hum of the chandeliers, he heard it, a sound that did not belong. Steady, patient, the small, even tap of water finding its way down through something that was supposed to be solid. Drip, drip, drip. Earl crossed the empty ballroom slowly, between the white-clothed tables, toward the far corner, where the sound was coming from. He did not hurry. Hurrying makes you miss things. He stopped under the patch of newer paint and looked up. Then he reached out and laid his palm flat against the wall beneath it, the way you'd lay a hand on a horse to feel whether it's about to bolt. The plaster was cool, damp. He held his hand there a long moment, reading the temperature of it, the give of it, the faint swell, where water had been working behind the surface for longer than 2 weeks. He pulled a chair over, stepped up, and pressed 2 fingers against the painted square. It flexed under his touch. Behind it, the ceiling was not solid. It was a skin over a problem. Earl stepped down. He took the brass weight from his pocket, unwound the cord, and let the plumb bob hang from his fingers beneath the long ceiling beam that ran the length of that corner of the room. A wall can lie to your eye. The line never does. He sighted along the cord. The brass hung straight and true toward the floor. And against that true vertical line, the beam above it was visibly, quietly wrong. It dipped. Not much. A finger's width of sag. Across its span, the kind of thing no eye catches on its own, and no eye can unsee once a plumb line shows it. The beam was holding the weight of a saturated ceiling, and it was beginning, slowly, patiently, to let go. In about 9 hours, 200 people would sit at these tables underneath it. Earl wound the cord back around the brass and stood there for a second, doing the math he had spent 11 years learning to do. Then he went to find Mercer, because whatever else was. Ballroom, Earl said. There's water tracking behind that ceiling in the northeast corner. The main beam over the head table is sagging. I'd put it at 3/4 of an inch off true across the span. That patch is hiding a leak, not fixing one. You can't seat that room in the morning. Not under that corner. For 1 second, Mercer's face did something honest. His eyes went up the stairs toward the ballroom, and a flicker of cold understanding crossed them, because he knew about the leak. He had signed the word completed himself. He knew exactly what was behind that paint, and that was precisely why he could not let this man be right. To admit the beam was failing was to admit the patch, and the postponed repair, and the $12,000. Moved off a ledger he needed clean by 9. It was to hand the new owners, on their first morning, a reason to look hard at every number he'd smoothed. A stranger in a work coat had just put a finger on the one thing Mercer had spent 2 weeks painting over. So Mercer laughed. It came out short and tight. You measured my ceiling, he said. With that, he nodded at the cord in Earl's hand, the small brass weight. Put the little toy away. We've got people for the real work, licensed people who don't wander in off the street and play inspector. The ballroom's fine. It passed. It didn't pass. You patched it. Earl's voice didn't rise. Send someone up with a ladder and a moisture meter. 10 minutes. If I'm wrong, I'll walk out and you'll never see me again. If I'm right, you close that corner tonight. What I'm going to do, Mercer said, is have you removed. He turned to the officer. Now, please. And then he did the thing that would end him. He went back behind the desk, pulled up the incident form he'd left open, and began to type, fast, while it was fresh, building his wall. He did not write down a confused man asking for a room. He wrote down a man who would not leave, who climbed to a restricted floor, who made alarming and unfounded claims about the building's safety in front of staff. He wrote it to get ahead of it. That way, if anyone ever asked about the ballroom, there would be a record that the warning had come from a trespasser, a crank, a nobody to be escorted out. He typed, in his own words, that the man had specifically claimed the ballroom ceiling beam was unsafe, and that he, the manager on duty, had judged the claim baseless and ordered the man removed. He signed it. He time-stamped it. He felt better. By 9, every line Mercer had typed would be read back to him. Earl saw the officer step toward him and understood the night was over for him here. He had perhaps 2 minutes before he was on the other side of the glass. He did not spend them arguing. He spent them working. He walked, unhurried, to the utility alcove off the lobby corridor. He'd noted its location at 6 o'clock, the way he noted everything. He found the water shutoff for the second-floor wet wall and turned it down, cutting the feed that was filling the ceiling cavity. Then he went back up the stairs too. At a time, the officer following, confused now. He went into the ballroom and pulled the head table and 4 chairs out from under the sagging corner and dragged them to the center of the room. It took 90 seconds. He left a chair tipped on its side directly under the worst of the sag, a marker, the universal language for "do not stand here." Renee Ortiz had come up behind them, drawn by the noise. She stood in the doorway and watched a man she'd been told was a troublemaker shut off a valve, clear a danger zone, and flag a hazard. He did it calmly, expertly, like a man who had done emergency work under worse conditions than a quiet hotel at midnight. And she watched her manager stand at the bottom of the stairs with a printed sheet in his hand, refusing to walk up and look. She did not say anything, but she took out her phone and quietly, with her hands below the desktop, she began to write down what she was seeing: the time, the valve, the chairs, the words she'd glimpsed on Mercer's screen on her way past. Completed. If you've ever watched something unfair happen and felt your hands tie themselves behind your back, that pause before you decide whether tonight is the night you stop just watching, then you already know exactly where Renee was standing. Most of us have stood there. What we do next is the whole story. "Sir," the officer said to Earl, not unkindly. Safety. He had done what mattered. The rest could wait 9 hours. "All right," he said. He let them walk him down the stairs and across the marble. At the desk, Mercer pushed the printed incident report into his hand without looking at him, a final small cruelty. Dressed up as procedure, Earl folded it once and put it in his pocket next to the brass weight. The glass doors opened onto the thin rain over the river walk. It was exactly midnight. By 9, every line Mercer had typed would be read back to him, out loud, in a bright room, in front of the people he most wanted to impress. And the man in the work coat would be standing at the front of it. 9 hours after they walked him out, the Aldridge looked like a different building. Morning came in white and clean through the tall lobby windows. The rain had stopped. The marble had been buffed, the chandeliers dimmed for daylight. The whole staff had been called in early and arranged in a loose line near the front desk, the way people stand when they've been told to look their best for someone who matters. At 9 sharp, the new owners would walk in, and the Aldridge would change hands. Grant Mercer stood at the front of the line in his best suit, the one he'd worn through the night. He had not slept. He had spent the small hours making the lobby perfect, and the books even cleaner. He had filed the incident report where the day team would find it, and he had told himself the thing in the ballroom could hold one more morning. The conference had been quietly moved to a smaller room on the ground floor. He'd handled that at 6 a.m., framing it as a scheduling courtesy. No one had gone up to look at the corner. No one had questioned the tipped chair, because Mercer had gone up himself and set it upright and pushed the table back. He had, in other words, spent the morning undoing the one thing that had been keeping the room safe. At 2 minutes to 9, the doors opened. A woman came in first. She was around 50, silver at the temples, in a charcoal coat, carrying a leather folio under one arm. She moved through the lobby the way people move through buildings they've already studied on paper. Mercer stepped forward with his best smile and his hand out. "Welcome to the Aldridge. Grant Mercer, night manager. Well, you're manager now, I hope. We've got everything ready for you. Diane." "Falk," the woman said. She shook his hand once, briefly, and her eyes were already moving past him, taking attendance of the room. "Operating board, on behalf of the partnership." She set the folio on the front desk and opened it. On top of the documents inside, she laid down a small object and set it carefully, deliberately, where the light would catch it. It was a brass plumb bob on a worn cord. Mercer looked at it. For a moment it meant nothing to him, and then it meant everything, all at once, and the bottom went out of his stomach before his mind had even finished the sentence. "My operating partner walked the property last night," Diane said, not looking up from the papers. "Standard pre-closing inspection. He should be along any second." He likes to come in the front. She allowed herself the smallest smile. He's funny about that. Says you learn the most about a building by how it treats you when it doesn't know who you are. And then the doors opened again, and Earl Whitfield walked in. He had on the same faded work coat. He had not changed it, and that was its own quiet statement. He came across the marble unhurried, reading the room the way he read everything, and he stopped a few feet from the line of staff, and he looked at Grant Mercer. Mercer did not move. He had a coffee cup in his right hand, and very slowly, as if it had become too heavy, he set it down on the desk. Some part of him was still trying to assemble an explanation, and another part, the older and more honest part, had already understood that there wasn't one. The man he had ordered removed at midnight, the nobody in the coat, the one with the little toy, was the man who now owned every square foot of the floor he was standing on, and the little toy was lying on the closing documents. Like a seal, he looked at the plumb bob. He looked at the coat. He thought, though he would never say it, of a beam 3/4 of an inch off true, with 200 chairs underneath it. He thought of his own hand setting that tipped chair back upright at 6 o'clock that morning. Shane Dolan, 2 places down the line, had gone the color of the marble. Earl did not raise his voice. He never did. Miss Falk and I closed an hour ago, he said, to the room. As of 9 this morning, the partnership owns the Aldridge, and I'm the one who'll be running it. Before we go any further, there's a beam over the northeast corner of the ballroom that's carrying a saturated ceiling and sitting about 3/4 of an inch low. Nobody goes up there until a structural engineer clears it. The morning conference does not seat in that room. Is that already handled? A silence. Then Renee Ortiz stepped half a step out of the line. It was handled at midnight, she said. Her voice shook and then steadied. He shut the water off and cleared the corner himself before security walked him out. I watched him do it. She held up her phone. I wrote down the time. I wrote down all of it. Diane Fox slid one sheet of paper out of the folio and laid it on the desk beside the brass weight. And this is the incident report Mr. Mercer filed at 12:06 this morning, she said. It's a thorough document. In it, Mr. Mercer states, in his own words, that the man he ordered removed had specifically warned him the ballroom ceiling beam was unsafe. He states that he, the manager on duty, judged the warning baseless and had the man escorted out. She looked up. He wrote down the exact hazard. Then he moved a conference under it. She let that sit in the bright room for one full breath. I filed a report on him, Mercer said. It came out before he could stop it. A reflex, a man reaching for the last handhold. It's documented. He was, I know, Earl said quietly. I read it. He took the folded sheet from his own coat pocket, the one that had been pressed against the plumb bob all night, and set it on the desk next to Diane's copy. The same report. You wrote down that I told you the beam was failing. You wrote it down to protect yourself. It's the most honest thing in the building. Mercer had no sentence left that could reach the end of itself. There was no triumph in Earl's face. I want to be clear about that, because it would have been so easy, and it would have been so much smaller. He was not enjoying this. He looked at Mercer the way you look at a man who has just watched his own hand pull the floor out from under him. What was in Earl's face was closer to a kind of tired recognition than to victory. Mr. Mercer, Earl said, I'm not removing you because you turn me away. People misjudge a man in a work coat every day of the week. That's an old, ordinary thing, and a man can learn his way out of it. He paused. I'm removing you because you knew that beam was bad, and you painted over it. And when somebody told you the truth, you wrote a report to bury the truth instead of fixing the danger. You'd have seated 200 people under it to keep your books clean. He shook his head once. That's not a thing I can train. As of this morning, you're done here. Effective now. Mercer stood very still. Whatever argument he had left, he chose not to use it. He straightened his jacket once, the small automatic gesture of a man trying to save the last intact piece of himself, and he walked toward the back office without another word. The brass weight lay on the desk in the white morning light, pointing the only direction it ever pointed. Down. True. The same in the bright room as it had been in the dark. The room did not erupt. That was not the kind of room it was, and Earl was not the kind of man who would have wanted it to. For a moment, nobody moved at all. Then the ordinary sounds of a morning came back, one at a time. A phone at the desk, a cart somewhere down a corridor, the soft clearing of someone's throat in the line. The staff stood waiting to learn what kind of place they worked in now. Earl turned to Shane Dolan. The young clerk looked like he hadn't taken a full breath since the doors opened. Earl crossed to him and stopped at the counter, and when he spoke, his voice was low enough that it was only for the two of them. "Last night you decided what I was worth before I finished a sentence," Earl said. "Not because of anything I did. Because of a coat and a cord hanging out of my pocket." He let that sit a second. "I'm not firing you. You didn't paint over a beam. You did something smaller and more common. You decided a tired man in work clothes didn't get to stand in your lobby." He paused. "I want you to sit with what that felt like from the other side. That's all. Then I want you to come work for the version of this place I'm about to build, if you still want to." Shane nodded. It was a small movement, but it was real. Earl moved down the line to Renee Ortiz. She straightened as he reached her, the way you do when you're braced to find out whether telling the truth cost you something. "You wrote it down," Earl said. "When it would have been easier to keep your eyes on your screen, you took out your phone. And you wrote down what was true." He nodded, slowly. "I need people who can act on what they see, not just notice it. Starting today, you're off the overnight audit. You're going to shadow the front desk on days, and if it goes the way I think it will, you'll be running a shift by spring. We'll talk about the title when you've earned it, and you will." Renee opened her mouth, then closed it, then simply said, "Okay." It was the steadiest thing anyone had said all morning. He found Danny near the back of the line, the young porter who had taken Allie's bag without being asked, and found a mother and her son a safe place to sleep. "You already know how to do the job," Earl told him. "You did it last night, for two people who couldn't do anything for you in return. That's the whole thing. That's all it ever was." Danny grinned at the floor. The Aldridge reopened 11 weeks later. It took about $1.4 million to do the building right. The ballroom beam replaced, the wet wall opened up and made honest 92 rooms, brought back one floor at a time. But the partnership had not bought a hotel to run a hotel. They had bought 92 rooms and a commercial kitchen and a ballroom, because all of it, taken together, was a place to teach. They called it the Aldridge Trade House. Half the building stayed a working hotel. The other half became a school, a place where veterans coming off active duty learned the civilian trades that their service had quietly already trained them for. Earl had spent 11 years learning that a combat engineer is a structural inspector, a logistics sergeant is an operations manager. A medic is half a nurse. The skills come home. The country just doesn't always have a door marked for them. So Earl built the door. He liked to tell the first class the same thing. On the first day, holding up a small brass weight on a worn cord so they could watch it settle. "Most of you have been made to feel like you walked in off the street," he'd say. "Like the real work belongs to somebody with cleaner hands. I'm here to tell you the line doesn't care what your hands look like. It only cares whether you're true." He'd let the plumb bob hang still. "Level holds in the dark. You already know that. The service taught it to you. Now we're going to get you paid for it." One afternoon, that fall, a woman came through the lobby doors with a boy and an overnight bag, and she did not have the look of someone whose travel day had come apart. She had the look of someone keeping a promise. Back in the spring, on a night her flight had stranded her, a stranger in a work coat had found her and her son a safe place to sleep when the front desk wouldn't. She had told her boy they would come back someday and say thank you properly. Sam had not let her forget it. Renee Ortiz came around the desk before they reached it. She didn't look at the bag or the shoes. She looked at the woman's face and the boy holding tight to her hand, and she smiled like she meant it, because she did. "We're here to see Earl," the boy announced, to the lobby in general. Earl was across the lobby, in a jacket this time, going over a delivery list with Danny. He looked up at the small voice. For a moment, before the boy spotted him, he just watched Renee crouch down to Sam's level the way he himself had crouched in that same lobby in the spring, watched the easy welcome of it. And he let himself feel the thing he had spent a lifetime trying to build, finally just running on its own. with no one performing for the boss. Then the boy turned and saw him, and his whole face opened up. "Earl," Sam shouted across the lobby. "Did you tell the Wade I said hi?" Earl laughed, really laughed, the sound surprising him a little. "Every single day," he said. "There's a thing about a plum bob that I didn't understand until I'd carried this story around for a while. It doesn't argue. It doesn't raise its voice. You can hold your hand any way you like, tilt it, shake it, lie to it, and it just quietly keeps pointing at the truth and waits for you to be still enough to read it. Some people are like that. We walk past them in work coats and decide they're nobody, and the whole time they're standing there, dead level, holding the line in the dark while the rest of us paint over the things we don't want to look at. The Aldridge isn't a real hotel, and Earl Whitfield isn't a real man. The names, the places, the night it all happened, I made them up. But the moment underneath it is as real as anything I know. The way we size a person up by their clothes and their hands and decide, before they've said a word, how much dignity they're owed. The man who fixes your ceiling, the woman who cleans your room, the tired stranger at the desk at midnight. We are so quick to decide they walked in off the street, and so slow to notice they might be the most squared-away person in the building. I wrote this because my own father came home tired from work that other people thought didn't matter, and I spent a long time learning what he already knew. If you served, and you're standing in that gap between the uniform and whatever comes next, the transition is real, and so is the help. Your state's Veterans Employment Office is a real door, and it opens. Walk through the front. Let them learn who you are. And the next time someone hands you something small and worn and tells you to put the toy away, hold it up to the light and watch which way it points.